Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? I think this season, I don't recall a podcast recorded after both our teams had decent away wins.
I think you're absolutely right there. I think this could be even more irritatingly cheerful from me than usual. We've never beaten Chelsea in the league. In fact, we've only scored once before. So we actually to score 2 goals in a single game was ridiculous. And as for the winner, pure partridge, the way it hit the back of the net.
I have to say, though, I actually quite admired your manager in the interview afterwards when asked about that goal. He went, yeah, it was a good goal, but then he took the rest of the game off. Which is what's the point, he said, of scoring a goal like that and then just basically strolling around like a fancy Dan. Interesting, though, Kieran, you tweeted, I think, at the end of that game, almost the most amazing stat I've seen for many a year, certainly since the pod started.
Yes, I actually tweeted it when it happened, which is a tragic indictment of my life. I think it was, on about the hour mark, Chelsea made a substitution. And off came Fernandes, the most costly player in the history of the Premier League, Raheem Sterling, Pulisic and Fofana, who together cost £281 million. And on came João Felix, Ziyech, Kovacic and Mason Mount, who came from their academy. But the total value, because João Felix is on loan, but the total value of the players coming off and going onto the pitch at the same time, in terms of their most recent transfer fees, £470 million.
Wow. I mean, that's astonishing. Obviously, I was in a state of mild euphoria for most of yesterday evening, but it did annoy me a little bit that no one asked Frank Lampard if he would happily compare his record with Roy Hodgson's. Both played 3 games. Also, I do owe an apology to Leeds fans, by the way. Those 3 Leeds news stories were genuinely news stories that would have been in the pod regardless of what had happened at Ellen Road last week. But I do take on the chin the fact that some Leeds fans thought that I was taking the piss. So that's the politest way I could put, Kieran. There was no intention of so doing. And my understanding is there are no Southampton questions in this pod. Kieran, you are, of course, Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. We saw a strange sight this week of a Premier League club based just a mile or so from where you are up there at Liverpool University, admitting that they didn't have the money or the inclination to buy that footballer that they were promising to buy for the whole of last season.
Yeah, this was a very strange... it was clearly leaked to the press that Liverpool are not interested in Jude Bellingham. Well, first of all, he's under contract for a few more seasons at Dortmund. Yeah. He doesn't have a release clause, so therefore it would have to be a negotiated fee. And given his performances this season, that's going to be pretty expensive. And then Jurgen Klopp came out with some very strange comments about you wouldn't buy a 5-year-old a Ferrari for Christmas if they wanted a Ferrari. I think trying to sort of placidly or politely sort of say that just because loads of people on social media say sign this player and sign that player, it doesn't necessarily mean that the club's in a position to do so, because that would be blowing the whole of the budget on a single signing. But yeah, Bellingham is a very good player. Yeah, we're straying into the realms of football here. But football clubs do not have unlimited budgets unless they have backers who can fund it. And Liverpool's owners have made it very clear from the start that the only reason they will provide additional finance is for infrastructure projects, which will then generate income. So Anfield is going to be increased to 61,000 capacity. FSG are quite happy to provide some funding for that. But in terms of sort of the day-to-day activities, they're pretty reluctant to go, and dip their hands in their pockets in the way that perhaps we would have seen Abramovich do during his tenure at Chelsea.
Or we've seen Todd Boehly do, only to still lose it to Brighton at home. And to bring it back to the world of football finance, though, Kieran, someone somewhere, mainly 5 million Liverpool fans across the world, have got it into their head that the Fenway Sports Group, who own the club, have kind of said they're going to put all their eggs in one basket, and Jude Bellingham would be coming to Liverpool in the summer. And it seems, whether that was a false impression, it almost seems to be the straw that's broken the camel's back here for Liverpool fans, who suddenly over the weekend have now said that enough is enough, we want these people out.
Yes, and I'm not quite sure what they're looking for, because the Liverpool fans that I know, and I work in the city, they've been quite adamant. Liverpool is a very proud city in terms of its heritage and roots, and all of the local Liverpool fans that I know say, well, we're not looking for Middle Eastern investment. We don't want a sugar daddy. We are very proud of the history of the club and what it stands for in terms of its values. And they feel that would be compromised by going for a model of a sugar daddy owner. The non-Liverpool fans of Liverpool Football Club appear to be having a slightly more relaxed approach to that philosophy, though.
Yeah. Speaking of proud, Kieran, and this doesn't often happen, this is actual breaking news. You and I are not averse to a bit of showbiz stardust, shall we say, being thrown in our eyes from time to time. I've just had a WhatsApp message from Adrian Childs to say that he really likes the pod. Adrian,
cool.
That's lovely to hear from you, Adrian. I'm glad you're a fan, and let's give it for. I believe he owes me a pint for the last time Palace played West Brom, because we beat them and he went off in a huff. So it's lovely to hear from him. One more news story, Kieran, before we get into questions. And it's a news story that we have predicted would happen sooner rather than later, but perhaps not quite as soon as it has happened.
Well, this is spectacular smoke and mirrors from the Premier League. With a big fanfare, they announced that from the end of the 25-26 season, now to me that means the start of the 26-27 season, I'm not trying to be a smarty pants there.
Fair point.
That there will be a voluntary ban on front of shirt deals in relation to gambling sponsors. And people saying, well, that's great. Yeah, that's a step in the right direction. And if it is the start of a movement towards detaching the Premier League's relationship with the gambling industry, I think that's great. But it won't be, because you will be able to have a sleeve sponsor with a gambling logo. You will be able to have training kit, presumably, with the front of a training shirt with a gambling logo. You will still be able to have perimeter advertising from gambling companies, and they tend to be fairly common. And you will still be able to have gambling sponsors, but just not front of shirt. So when we see the players standing in front of those perspex boards in the post-match interviews, and you got the names of lots of sponsors, well, you can have your gambling name there. So why has this been done? Well, there are two white papers in circulation. One, which has not yet been published, is in respect of reform of gambling. Now, the gambling industry has been the most successful stakeholder in football since the creation of the Premier League. The rise of smartphones, the rise of apps, the ability to bet online and not have to traipse to a bookies or even make a phone call has meant that that the gambling industry has surfed that particular wave. And we're not in favour of prohibition or anything like that. In fact, I bet on the match yesterday.
Yeah.
So I've got no issue with that. But when you see the increase in the number of bets that are being placed, and when you see that football has now overtaken horse racing in terms of the sport on which people gamble the most, I think football clearly does have a very close relationship. If we say, well, surely this is going to help, even in a little way, in terms of gambling harm in this country, I've got to be honest and say it will have zero impact. Right. And the reason for that, we presently have 8 sponsors of Premier League shirts, of whom 7 are non-UK based. We've only got Betway and West Ham. So if you think about the likes of Fun88 and Stake.com and these other organisations, they tend to be based in the Isle of Man. That's where they get their licences from, and they are mainly looking at the Asian gambling market, which is significant. So it's a big announcement, but it's small in impact. In terms of the value of the deals, most front of shirt deals in the particular market we're looking at are in the £7 to £10 million area. So that works out as just over 1% of total Premier League revenues. And people say, well, yeah, 1% still 1%. But if gambling companies pull out, they will be replaced by somebody else. Yes, they might not pay quite as much, but the total value we're looking at is probably in the region of £60 million. The Premier League's income in 2022 compared to 2019, which was the most recent non-COVID impacted year, the Premier League income's gone up by 500 million. So we're not talking about a financial problem. The big six clubs, they don't care because they've all got global sponsors as opposed to gambling sponsors, because some of the geographical markets might have local rules in respect of gambling which prohibit it, so they don't tend to particularly work. And then you've got to say, well, who is going to replace gambling on the front of shirts? Yeah, if we end up with crypto companies, we've established crypto is gambling with a small g, which brings us to the second white paper. The Premier League, Richard Masters, I think it's fair to say, took a grilling before a DCS committee a few weeks ago. And for the sake of transparency, as we always like to do, I'm sitting in front of that DCS committee on Tuesday at 11 a.m. So if you're not fancying watching Jeremy Vine's choice of shirt for the day, tune into Parliament TV and I'll give you a wave. But I've been asked to talk about the relationship between crypto and NFTs and football. And that potentially leading to broader issues in terms of sponsorship and gambling and so on. I think it's a big announcement of practically zero substance. A football club could move from having a non-gambling sponsor and sign up for a deal this summer for a 3-year deal with a gambling sponsor, and it will be within the Premier League's new rules.
Well done, Kieran, for actually saying Parliament this time, rather than one of your euphemisms where you dance around it by saying I'll be in the Westminster area or the SW1 vicinity, whatever postcode it is. Did your bet yesterday, the Chelsea-Brighton game, involve Chelsea winning at all?
It did.
Shameful, Kieran. That's the worst aspect of this whole conversation, the fact that you do that sort of thing. Just off on the timing of this announcement from the Premier League, is it anything to do, Kieran, with the announcement we spoke about last week coming out of Spain and Italy announcing a total ban on gambling sponsorship? Or at the risk of sounding like a stuck record, is it again to do with the white paper on an independent regulator, and this is the Premier League saying we can look after our own affairs, thank you very much?
Well, I think there's an element of both of those. There was certainly reports in the newspapers a couple of months ago that the Premier League was rowing back in terms of having a voluntary ban. I think the comments from Richard Masters he was clearly through gritted teeth saying we will work along with DCMS with regards to the regulator. And again, I'll just say what we've said before. It will have no impact on the Premier League itself. Yeah. There's no way that the Taliban are going to go and buy Manchester United. So it's a non-issue.
Yeah. I really hope that whichever MP or cabinet minister is leading the grilling on Tuesday, in which you are involved, listens to this pod, just so they can start by saying, just for the record, Mr. Maguire, you like to gamble on the opposing team in any game that your club is involved in, don't you?
Yes.
Just want to see that in Hansard, Kieran. I want to see Mr. Maguire. It says Mr. Maguire squirmed. It says in italics, and then gave an evasive answer. Question number one, Kieran, comes from Mark Ridley, you'd be amazed, I think, Kieran, how many times I get asked in perfectly normal pubs, football pubs, whether we'd ever considered doing a podcast about the finances of cricket or rugby. And every time I'm asked that question, I'm so stunned by it that basically all I can do is give them the Paddington hard stare, which I do very well. And I just look at them until they go away, because just the concept of doing that sort of thing is even now I'm starting to get slightly annoyed by the fact that people come up to me. But Mark Ridley has an interesting question, and I think this is something people are, or certainly a comparison people like to make as football increasingly dominates everything in British sport. So Mark Ridley says, how do the finances of a county cricket club compare to that of a football club? They both have similar sized squads and have to finance running academy size. Where, for example, would Surrey's revenue put them in the football finance pyramid? If you could blow some sort of whistle when you've answered that question, Kieran, just so I can start paying attention again, that would be great.
Well, you might not be aware of this, but producer Guy did approach me a few months ago with regards to the price of cricket.
Did he?
He did.
Well,
yes.
Well, we've got an issue there, Kieran. He didn't approach me. I'd take up. Who was going to host this price of cricket?
Well, I had a brief discussion with the Baroness, who
she was going to host it.
Well, she might have had to, because she did point out
Andy Zoutsman's busy. I can't imagine who else it could be.
She pointed out that the price of divorce would perhaps be more appropriate, given that effing football finance takes up far too much of my life, and don't you think for one moment of going through and doing other sports. So I was. So it went no further. But it's certainly a question I've been asked as well. Except I've been asked them in sort of quinoa dens rather than pubs, as you can imagine. So if we look at the position of Surrey, and I'm also going to look at Durham, just to give a bit of contrast here. Surrey's income is around about £45 million a year. Now, that's more than a club in the Championship, unless that club is in receipt of parachute payments.
Okay.
However, a significant amount of that income will be in respect of hosting matches for the ECB in terms of test matches.
Right. Okay.
Because I thought, well, blimey, I was quite taken aback, and I said, okay, well, I wonder what the wages are like. And so, okay, on income of £45 million, the wage bill was only £7 million. Right. So that is similar to probably a club in League One, as opposed to much bigger than any club in the Championship. And of that wage bill of £7 million, £1.2 million went to the directors, which I'm sure they're doing an absolutely fantastic job. So it's if you are a test hosting club, then you do get a lot of money, but a lot of that money then goes straight back to the ECB, because you're effectively you're selling the tickets on behalf of the ECB, and you won't get very much from that. If we then contrast to Durham's income was in the region of £6 million. So Durham, I'd say, is more akin to a half decent League One team. There'll be one or two clubs in League Two which will have a similar level of income. And my understanding is that professional cricketers, I don't think they have 12-month contracts as well. So many of them, will have contracts during the season. And the nature of cricket, especially these days, I was watching the IPL matches earlier today. There is quite a sort of a nomadic existence for cricketers. And then, of course, you've got many players who are centrally contracted to England as well, which means that they rarely, if ever, have the opportunities to play for their nominal counties.
It's interesting. I do like it. I mean, Surrey is my team. And as you know, I mean, one of our oldest listeners, as in listening for the longest time, Martin Searle, is involved with Surrey County Cricket Club. And as you know, because you've met him, one of my dearest friends. has worked at Surrey County Cricket Club for many years in a senior position. And it's interesting to note that it seems that most of their income, or certainly a substantial amount of it, comes from 2020 as well. It's those evenings where you pray for long summer evenings. It's like they don't particularly like. The cricket purists are not necessarily fans of 2020, and some of the people who work in cricket, I know, are not necessarily fans of it as a game. But if you do have a long summer evening, apart from making me really cross, it means that if Surrey are playing Essex, for example, or Kent or Middlesex at the Oval, then just about every banker in the City of London will be there at 5 o'clock, splashing out a large amount of money on beer and champagne, and that's where they really make their income. They're not making it from those days that I enjoy, when there's about 50 people scattered around the ground watching the fourth day of a fifth day meandering to a draw. So it's interesting, and it's also really interesting the way that when there is a Test match at the Oval, so when Australia come to town, essentially the Oval becomes the ECB's for 5 days, in the same way that South Africa or Russia becomes FIFA's for the duration of a World Cup.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've watched the T20 matches between Lancashire and Yorkshire at Old Trafford on occasions, and it's packed to the gills, and it is memorable for both what happens on and off the pitches during those matches.
Yeah, one of my abiding memories of cricket was being at I can't remember what it was. The Oval. It was the T20 semi-final day. And Surrey were playing Lancashire. Lancashire's mascot was a giraffe, Lanky the giraffe. You get it?
Oh, very good.
I know. There were 5 Surrey fans who I think were essentially either Chelsea or Millwall fans just having a day out, who stalked Lanky the giraffe around the whole pitch, and then eventually brought him down like a wildlife documentary. It's just, you shouldn't know, it's just one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It was just, you could almost hear David Attenborough saying he fell back from the others. It was a terrible, terrible thing. Stephen Drake has his question, and this is a question I'm really interested in. Stephen Drake says, last season Portsmouth offered fans the chance to sponsor a player for the season at £695 plus VAT. How much of this money is typically kept by the club as the arranger of the transaction, and how much does the player really keep if they're taxed on it as income or image rights? And what interests me, Kieran, is back in the day, most football clubs did it, but certainly at Palace there was a kind of spreadsheet in the back of the programme where individuals or groups could sponsor the shirt, shorts and socks of a player, and me and 5 mates sponsored Neil Redfern's socks. It cost us about a £5 each a week, and they didn't have a font small enough to fit all our names in. But nevertheless, we felt part of it for that £5 a week, but it never occurred to us to ask how much Neil Redfern was getting on that as image rights.
Right. The player will be getting zero. This is money which is directed to the club, and it's a alternative to having a season ticket. I've done the same on 1 or 2 occasions, and I think at the end of the season you get invited to a meal at the club. Not
if you only sponsor Neil Redfern socks, you don't.
In fact, I sponsored somebody who's been on this show, Dean Hammond. Way back when, and then as soon as we got to the Premier League, the prices went through the roof, and that was it. I was out of the running. But yeah, it is a case of clubs trying to use as many methods as possible. First of all, you do feel slightly closer to the club and the player. If he's when your players, your players makes a tackle, that's my sock that did that. You'll be saying to your mates in the Parsons Arms after the match, and so on. So it is simply a way of increasing the much broader issues of club finances, given that so many clubs are losing money at present.
Apologies, by the way, for the slight hoarseness to my voice, everybody. It's because I spent around about 5 hours last night shouting "get in" at intervals of 15 minutes or so. I've also got slightly tired eyes from looking at the league table over and over again. first world problems, Kieran. Andrew Sands has a question that's increasingly being asked in terms of sustainability. And Andrew Sands says, in a world where we're all being encouraged to live more sustainably, why do football clubs, mainly in the Premier League, feel the need to print the fixture and date, etc., on their squad's matchday shirts, meaning they can only ever be worn once? Assuming it applies to the whole 25 players per week over a season, that's a lot of shirts. How much would it cost the supporter consumer each season? And what happens to the shirts when they've been worn? I have to say, Kieran, in my experience, this tends to happen more in cup games, doesn't it, than league games? But it is a very good question. I mean, certainly at international level, every game that international teams play, those shirts can only ever be used once because they will have the date of the fixture and the flags of the two opposing teams on.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, in the Premier League, I think many clubs wear special shirts for the Remembrance Weekend because they'll have poppies on, and those are then sold to raise money for the relevant charities. And if it's a special match, then a cup final or so on, then again that's likely to be to have a special badge. But if not, it's they only get a set number of shirts. Now, certainly in the lower leagues, because I think we have spoken to a few clubs, you get X number of shirts, and that's what's used. And then at the end of the season, what tends to happen is sometimes the clubs will have sort of the equivalent of not a jumble sale, and they'll invite fans, and you can go and buy some of the match-worn kit. Quite often, they will then be passed down to the academy for the following season. So, the academy end up wearing the first team's kit in training from the previous season, and so on. But again, for those specific matches, the player is entitled to a shirt. There will normally be 2 shirts for a player for a match because it might get muddy. You might get a whack on the nose and bleed and want to change it. So there's normally 2 shirts, I think, for internationals, of which quite often the club might keep one for a special occasion match. And we sometimes see those going up on eBay or similar websites. There are now specific websites, and it's a means of raising money for the club. And of course, the player may want a memento. Debut for England or another home nation or whoever the international team's going to be. So they aren't thrown away. Sometimes you end up with lots of them stuck in a drawer. But I think that's the case with many. We could also say the same with regards to the much broader issue of football kits, given that so many clubs are now changing 2 or 3 sets of kit a season, whereas it used to be one kit would last you 2 seasons or 3 seasons. And now I think we've only got Brentford who are committing to that.
I think we could also say the same about your bedroom wardrobe, Kieran, which is crammed with more shirts than the National Football Museum have got, I believe. It's a number of those issues for the Mariners. Why have you bought that kit? It's Stranraer's third kit. Who can not have Stranraer's third kit in their drawer that you can't close because it's full of kits? David Walton has our next question, and it's a subject, Kieran, that's rapidly moving into, I think, the top 5 bees in bonnets of our listeners at the moment. And David Walton says, what would be the financial implications of moving the National League into the EFL, creating a League 3 and opening up promotion and relegation to the same standard as between League 1 and League 2, i.e. 4 teams up and 4 teams down?
Well, I think we are moving into a scenario of 3 up, 3 down fairly soon. Certainly when we had the guy from the National League on the show, Mark, seemed to think that was good. And also some of the noises I'm hearing from people in EFL clubs in League 2 is that they say, OK, we've got a greater chance of going down, but we've also got a greater chance of coming back up.
Yeah.
So I think they see the merits. I think the major financial implication would come back to distribution of monies, because at present, the money that the EFL generates from both its own TV deal and solidarity payments from the Premier League, which actually exceed the value of the EFL's deal, is that 80% goes to the Championship, 12% goes to League One, and 8% goes to League Two. Is the cake going to be much bigger if we have a Division 5 or League 3 or whatever we want to call it? The cake's not going to be much bigger, so therefore there's going to be some squabbles as to how it's going to be cut. So I think that could be an issue. The Premier League also gives those clubs that have academies money if they're in the EFL. Would that extend to a League 3 setup? That would have to be up for debate. But apart from that, I think people now see the National League as something really exciting. Anybody who watched the Wrexham versus Notts County match, that was pure theatre. You can imagine Reynolds and McElhenney. They said, "Well, we don't have to do any editing here." The script writes itself. So it's a fantastic league. It's new grounds to visit if you're a grounds hopper, and at least one person in this conversation is, and it is a meritocracy as well, because I think to let the top two go up from the National League and then have a playoff for the third, and potentially to expand that to 4 up in 4 down, we're certainly not seeing a dilution of talent, and that used to be the main issue. You and I are both old enough to remember when either the winner of the Northern Prem or the Southern League would have to go to a vote with the bottom team in Division 4, and it would be old men with cigars doing funny handshakes, and inevitably the side never got kicked out of League 4 unless it was very, very rare. And the argument put forward at the time would be that the quality of the teams coming up simply wouldn't match. Well, the National League is containing many clubs who are full-time professionals. They are now attracting players from League One and League Two because many of the clubs in the National League have wealthy backers. Now, there's a financial sustainability issue, separate discussion to be had there, but we're not getting straight coming up and coming down again. So I think that's indicative of the quality of the product in the National League.
Well, Ben Foster's in goal for Wrexham, isn't he?
He saved a penalty, didn't he, in the 95th minute?
Exactly. It'd be interesting, Kieran, to see. It looks like Wrexham will take that one automatic spot for promotion back into the league, and I don't think anybody would begrudge them. But it'd be interesting to see what happens to League Two, whether League Two gets the same publicity that the National League has got from having Wrexham there. I also suspect, Kieran, that your comment about funny handshakes might not make the final edit, because I'd be amazed if Producer Guy wasn't involved in some kind of secret society, wouldn't you? You would guess. Probably the Illuminati at best, but he's got to be a Mason at least, hasn't he? I really don't see how we'd have got a football finance pod up and running in the first place if he wasn't involved with some sort of secret society. There's got to be some reason for our baffling success. This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Manscaped. Everyone is aware by now that nose hairs are a major turn-off. That's why Manscaped have upgraded to their brand new Weed Whacker 2.0 nose and hair trimmer. With improved blades and motor, you can feel the power of nasty nose hair annihilation in the palm of your hands. And the improved Weed Whacker can now be found in their Performance Package 4.0 for no additional cost. Take a look at manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL for 20% off and free shipping. Take a look at manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL for 20% off and free shipping.
The new Weed Whacker 2.0 uses a powerful 7,000 RPM motor with an improved steel blade system that upgrades the cutting performance from their first generation to better whack your weeds. It also comes with skin-safe technology, which helps reduce nicks, snags, and tugs. It's cordless, rechargeable, and has a battery with up to 45 minutes of runtime. Can you imagine 45 minutes on your nostrils?
So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL, all in big letters, PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use that code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. Tom Thorpe has our next question. And I'm slightly confused by the first sentence, Kieran, because Tom says, I grew up as a Gillingham fan. Now, I'm hoping that doesn't imply that Tom is no longer a Gillingham fan, because, as we all know, neither of us approve of changing teams midstream, Kieran, although I believe Brighton are about the 17th club you've supported various times in your childhood. Tom says, I grew up a Gillingham fan, and I didn't know this, and which makes it a really interesting question. Back when I was a child, the club raised funds from the fans for a promised new Brian Moore stand to replace the old terrace stand there. Brian Moore, of course, being the wonderful LWT football commentator back in the 60s and 70s, who was a Gillingham director, I believe, or chairman at the time, I don't know. Since then, however, says Tom, they've had a temporary stand for, I believe, more than 20 years. It looks awful from behind, as it's mainly built from scaffolding. I was wondering why there isn't some kind of rule against how long you can have a temporary stand up for, and if there isn't, why do you think more clubs haven't taken advantage of it long term, as the seats sell for the same price? And I imagine it's a very cheap option.
Yes, I don't know. I've got half man, half biscuit coming into my head.
Yes, same here. Google it, everybody.
Yes. I think the reason why Gillingham have not converted the temporary stand into something more permanent is that the club was just about breaking even. The old owner, Paul Scally, I think the politest thing I can say about him is that he ran a very, very tight ship. The impolite things I can say about him can't be said on this podcast, but I'll let you know at the end of it.
Yeah.
But they've now got new American owners, so we've now got Brad Gallinson in as the new owner of Gillingham, as part of sort of the American new wave of owners who are buying into lower league clubs because they feel that they can project them and promote them. So as far as the maximum amount of time that we can have a temporary stand, that comes down to local regulations. There will have been a contract or there will have been approval from the council as to how long we're entitled to have this. Why do more clubs not do it is that most clubs want to offer facilities to attract people to come to matches, and some sort of glorified Lego construction doesn't really sit that bill on a long-term basis. As somebody that used to watch football at Withdean, which was mainly Lego in nature, it was a pretty horrendous experience. An uncovered stand with very, very rickety seats, open to all that the weather could throw at it. It was, you were there through gritted teeth. You were there through loyalty, and I think for clubs like Gillingham that don't sell out every week, you've got to persuade people to come to the matches. It is 2023, and some clubs still think it's 50 years ago in terms of what they offer fans, and then they wonder why perhaps they're not selling out.
Yeah, the Withdean was terrible, Kieran, so aren't you glad you had somebody like me who just for the sheer love of football campaigned incessantly to get you back to Brighton where you belong? I did one gig reluctantly and is still upset that he didn't get paid for it. Our next question comes from Christopher Segerhelm, and again, I will make the usual apology if I've mangled your name, Christopher. Christopher says, I just can't get my head around what's going on at Barcelona from a financial perspective. We could leave it there, Kieran.
Yes.
Christopher says, from a layman's point of view, and I like this analogy, from a layman's point of view, it sure looks like some sort of attempt to, like Marty McFly in Back to the Future, accelerate ad absurdum in the hope of getting back in time to set things right. I love the idea of the Barcelona chairman getting into the car if we can get. I know that we've probably not seen all of the shady business going on in Catalonia, but can one say anything about what the end result may be and potential consequences. Are there any relatable examples in English football or any worst-case scenarios from the history of sports? I'm not entirely sure, Kieran, if we've got time to answer that question, but I think it's very difficult to predict what will happen, except mainly nothing will happen.
Well, certainly in terms of punishment for Barcelona, nothing will happen financially unless La Liga decide to sanction them. The economic levers that Barcelona have pulled over the course of the last 12 months, I've said these are corporate payday loans.
Yeah.
It's short-term gain for long-term pain. Now, it's reasonably well known that I do not drink alcohol, but from what I understand, it's similar to what the experience of somebody having a hangover, i.e., you enjoy yourself for a few hours and you regret it for a considerably longer period. And that considerably longer period, as far as Barcelona is concerned, we could be talking even tens of years, because they have sold some of their rights to TV. They've sold some of their rights to sort of the intellectual property of the club going forwards in order to get cash now, which they can then go and splurge on poorly researched signings who haven't necessarily fitted into the club's philosophy particularly well. In terms of, are there examples in English football? I give you Leeds United and Peter Ridsdale. Because if we go back to when David O'Leary was the manager and had a twinkle in his eye, and Leeds were playing some damn good football. They were doing it on tick, and when they didn't qualify for the Champions League one year, I think they ended up borrowing against future gate receipts and so on. And I think somewhere in the region of £60 million, when, I know this sounds glib, when £60 million was a lot of money. We're talking 20 years ago. And Leeds meant that left them, that they were not able to compete as they would have liked. Leeds has been the biggest club in the Championship. They were there for 16 years. They were probably the biggest club for 12 of those years at least. I know that West Ham and Newcastle popped down on occasions during that period, but even so, Leeds was always seen as the big draw in the Championship. And people say, well, why wasn't that turned into promotion earlier? It was the hangover from what had happened earlier on. My concern at present is that West Bromwich Albion are going down a similar route. Yeah. We've got all of the complications in terms of the loans to the owner, the fact that they've borrowed £20 million from MSD Holdings and they're paying interest at 14.75%. That's almost credit card rates on corporate lending, and it is very disturbing because West Brom's parachute payments cease at the 30th of June, so those interest costs and those repayments have to come out of their day-to-day operational revenues, and that's going to make it really tough in the Baggies area.
Was that all building up to that last comment?
No. I had a mental block, but I couldn't remember the Hawthorns.
Oh, okay, right. Okay. I was waiting for you to say unexpected item in the Baggies area, but
yes.
I like the way you say West Ham and Newcastle pop down to the Championship as well, just to see what's happening there for a season or so, just have a cup of tea and then pop back up to the Premier League again. And some hangovers, Kieran, you'll never know this, but some hangovers are worth more than others, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, sure.
I can tell you that the unexpected third win in a row in the Premier League is a hangover that I was perfectly happy to cope with this morning, to be perfectly honest, although it's a terribly annoying thing where you realise you've been drinking for quite a long time and it's still an hour before match of the day's on and you won't be the first game. Craig Arnold has a question, Kieran, that you like because it's about his own club, but it also veers off in a different direction. So Craig Arnold said, my question is to do with my club Swindon, who when it comes to recruitment seem to be looking at a more sustainable model similar to the Moneyball/analytical approach of signing young discarded players, developing them and then selling them on for profit. This approach seems to have divided the Swindon Town fan base somewhat, however, with some saying it's the same approach that worked out well for Brentford, with others pointing out that Brentford owner Matthew Benham actually bought his way into the Premiership. So my question is, how much money have Brentford made from their recruitment strategy, and how much did Matthew Benham invest into the club out of his own pocket to get them into the Premier League?
Right. I mean, this is an interesting one, Craig. Matthew Benham is the owner of a company called Smart Odds. And in my view, Brentford have been promoted by being smarter rather than bigger than the other clubs in the Championship. If we take a look at their trading model when they were in the Championship, they were there for about, I think, 5 or 6 seasons. Over that period, they generated £140 million worth of profit from buying and selling players. And that was their ability to spot talent. And those players have gone. You think about Ollie Watkins, how good he's been for Villa. They've got decent fees. So £140 million worth of profits. That compares during the same period to just £19 million worth of revenue from ticket sales. So for every £1 of ticket sales, they've generated £7 of profit from the transfer market. And it's a case of algorithms. It's a case of understanding data. There's an awful lot of data out there in respect of the football model. What very few people are able to do is to actually convert that into a scenario where you can spot the talent which will fit in with your club. We've seen historically over the past 5 or 6 years, Everton, new owner comes in, spent a lot of money, club hasn't progressed on the pitch. We've got Todd Bowley and James Corden, the preceding and current director of football at Stamford Bridge. They've not exactly done wonders either in either player recruitment or manager recommendations. So that's the issue. So I can understand some Swindon fans being a bit cautious, but the alternative is to sign players on a hunch.
Yeah.
And, hunches don't always work either. So a more scientific approach does have some benefits, but you've got to, have the data, and Smart Odds do. Matthew Benham used to work for Tony Bloom, who's the Brighton owner, and I think it's fairly well known that's the model that we use. And those two, they don't talk these days. And then having the people who can interpret the data. I know, and people say to me, quite a few people say, "Well, could I use your spreadsheet? How long did it take you to make?" I said, "Well, my spreadsheet's probably 8 years worth of work." I said, "Well, you're giving it away to me for nothing." I said, "Well, yeah, because it probably means nothing to anybody apart from me. If somebody gives me a piano, it doesn't make me a piano player. If somebody gives me data, it doesn't mean that I'm a data analyst unless I understand how the numbers work." So I think the issue at Swindon is, do you have the people at the club? And I don't know the answer to this. We've got friends at Swindon. I'm sure they'll be able to fill us in on this. But do you have the people who can take use of that data and make it add value to your present model?
It's easier, though, Kieran, to buy players on a hunch when you're a billionaire, and it doesn't matter if that hunch pays off, does it? It's when you're looking at clubs further down the food chain who can't afford to do that. But it does amaze me sometimes that more clubs don't take a sort of data-based approach to signing. I mean, if you look, and I hate to say this, you look at Brighton yesterday, a lot of us who are immersed in football, you look at Brighton's team sheet and you go, well, where do these people come from? Then your 19-year-old Paraguayan lad scores a wonder goal, and you have to say to yourself, well, how did Chelsea not know about him? And the answer is that they're too busy looking for players that will satisfy their fans. And satisfying their fans doesn't involve signing a 19-year-old from Paraguay for however much. But however he works out, my guess is that you will sell that lad for more than you bought him for.
Yes, and that's the only way, because the financial disparity in the Premier League has grown. And I know people say there's a big gap between the Premier League and the Championship, and that is a distribution issue. But it's just that you and I, we both know at the start of the season, if we're doing cartwheels, we're 7th.
Yeah.
And
don't rub it in. We know. Yeah.
Chelsea fans are, they're all doom and gloom, and you're about to overtake them to make them the 6th best team in in London, let alone the Premier League.
So if that happens, Kieran, I've got a lot of friends who are Chelsea fans, but if we should overtake Chelsea somehow and end up ahead of them, the first thing I would do is march into TalkSport's offices and demand to be on the Andy Jacobs show for 2 whole hours, because it really will, as we discussed, upset him very much. Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Declan Rice. Very helpfully, in brackets, it adds the words, "not that one," basically, which
I'm really disappointed, actually.
Well, I like to think that maybe Declan Rice is underestimating us here, Kieran. He thinks that we'll be fooled by the fact that he is actually that Declan Rice, but we will be thrown off the trail simply by him putting "not that one" in brackets. So for the moment, I'm going to carry on with the assumption that it is that Declan Rice. Declan Rice says, as a Man United fan, oh no, it's not that Declan Rice, then, is it? As a Man United fan, I was wondering, this is a really interesting concept, Kieran. As a Man United fan, says Declan, I was wondering whether it would be possible for a potential new owner to buy the debt of Man United if the Glazers were unwilling to sell the club, and then call that debt in. I don't know all the ins and outs of finance, welcome to my world, but I have heard of debt being brought. I've recently read stories of hostile takeovers for Man United and wanted to know, could this be an option to get rid of the current owners if they decide not to sell willingly?
I love these types of questions.
I have to point out, Kieran, when I read out this type of question, I don't know whether it's genius or lunacy. I wait for you to tell me, and I can tell by the sound of your voice, which I predict the answer is.
Do you think this could actually be that Declan Rice, and it's a coded message to Old Trafford of "come and get me"? And we could be breaking the story live on the podcast.
Yeah. Kieran, could you... that would be great, wouldn't it? I wonder if Declan Rice is a Freemason. I could explain it. Would you, before you answer the question, Kieran, would you explain to me, at least, what the concept of a hostile takeover actually is? It's a phrase I hear and read about quite often, and I assume it's a takeover against the wishes of current owners, but I've never quite understood why it is that current owners can be bought out against their wishes.
Well, I think you have to separate, on some occasions, the board of directors from shareholders.
Okay.
Because if you are looking at a listed company, which is traded on the stock exchange, it will have millions and millions of shareholders, many of whom are going to be hedge funds, pension funds, insurance funds, and so on. And they've got no emotional attachment to the company. So somebody comes in, and normally the first thing you do is you get in contact with the board of directors and say, look, we're interested in buying the company. We're thinking of paying this. Would you be willing to recommend this to shareholders? Now, if the board of directors say, okay, yeah, we have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of shareholders, we think it is a good offer, and therefore we're going to recommend the deal. They might turn around and say, we're not comfortable about this either. We don't think the price is right. We don't think the culture of the new owners is right compared to sort of the history and the heritage of the company involved, and so on. So if that is the case, these potential owners can go and say, well, sod you, we're going to make an announcement that we're going to try to buy the company. And we saw this with Twitter and Elon Musk, that he tried to buy the company and Twitter said, well, we don't particularly want to be run by Elon Musk. We don't necessarily agree with all of his philosophy in life. And if you look what he's done, he's got rid of 75% of the staff in 6 months. So you can understand why they might feel they've got a protection and a duty of care towards the people that work there. So that's what we mean by a hostile takeover. It's where the relationship between the board of directors and the potential owners is such that they're probably not going to be kept on is another issue,
right.
And therefore they won't be necessarily opening up the books, inviting them round for tea and so on. So that's the position which would be the case. Now, in the case of Manchester United, the Glazer family have originally said that we are exploring opportunities to potentially reduce our holding within the club. So I think they're looking to walk away from the club if it's going to be a full sale. Although the stories are still doing the rounds that I think it's Avram and Joel want to have 51% of the votes, and the other four Glazers can sell their shares, and we could still end up with Glazer control of the club. So that's where we are in terms of sort of the concept of a hostile takeover. In the case of Manchester United has $650 million worth of loans. And in addition, Manchester United has I think it's now a £200 million overdraft facility. Doesn't mean that it's just like a normal overdraft facility. Doesn't mean that you're £200 million overdrawn. It's just that that's what you can borrow if you so need. And the repayment dates for those loans, there's one which expires in 2027 and one which expires in 2029. And Manchester United fans might be saying, well, hold on, 4 years' time, their first one's is due for repayment. But what will happen as you get closer to that date, you just kick it down the road. You just reschedule the repayment dates is the normal approach. Could a hostile bidder who has been rejected by the Glazer family, could they say, well, toys out of pram, you won't let us buy the company. What we're going to do is we're going to go to your lenders and buy what's known as the loan note. So loan note is where Manchester United issues IOUs to the market. Yes, they could, but because there are specific dates for repayment, if you tried to recall the loan early, then you'd be in breach of contract, and therefore you're unlikely to get very far. Secondly, whilst the Glazers would be using their lawyers to delay any progress on that, they'll also simply be going to other banks to say, look, we've got an awkward situation here. Would you like to take over our lending facility? And I can guarantee that there are a long list of banks who'd be more than happy to lend money to the Glazers.
Right, so Declan's question then is not beyond the realms of fantasy then?
It's not. I just don't think that a new potential owner could use this as a means of leverage to try to get the Glazers out, because you do have it's a bit like if my building society said, oh, by the way, Kieran, we don't like you very much. I know you're up to date with all of your payments. We want the mortgage repaid 3 years early. I go, well, hold on, I've got a contract. And the contract has obligations on both parties. You will be in breach of contract if you recall that money early, because I've maintained all of my side of the deal.
Could it work the other way around then, Kieran? Could the Glazers actually see that as a way out, or say owners of a fictional football club, could they say, we've had enough? Would somebody like to buy our debt?
Yes, they could. They might be able to renegotiate it and sell it on to somebody else. But the existing lenders, they would say, well, if that is the case, it will be the equivalent of me repaying my mortgage early, and therefore the following penalty clauses come into play. Right, okay. So it can, but it can also be costly from a financial perspective.
Our final question, Kieran, comes from Andrew Smith. We mentioned earlier that promotion and relegation to the National League was a very high new entry into our top five beefs, shall we say, from listeners. I mean, no disrespect to Everton fans listening, but Everton are also one of those high new entries. There's a mild obsession developing with Everton's finances, I think, in the whole world of football, outside that particular part of Stanley Park. And Andrew Smith says, can you explain the huge difference in transfer policy between my club, Leicester City, and Everton, please? Everton never seem too far away when a Cody or a Tarkowski becomes available, having seemingly already spent a fortune over the last couple of seasons. Meanwhile, in the East Midlands, we've signed no one, despite having qualified for Europe 2 seasons on the trot. The club has offered no public explanation for our grinding to a sudden halt like this, and everyone is assuming we need to comply with new FFP rules. How different are the finances of Leicester and Everton, and does FFP not apply in that part of the city of Liverpool? And even with the potential Premier League charges against Everton, Kieran, they are a club that the rest of football are seemingly slightly bemused by.
Yes. I like football bitterness. and and there's certainly an element of it here.
There is, yeah.
Andrew is absolutely right to say that Leicester have qualified for Europe on a regular basis. And what we have seen at Leicester in sort of certainly since they won the Premier League, which I still maintain is the greatest achievement in the Premier League era. What we have seen is a significant increase in their wage bill. And the problem is that you don't make much money from Europe unless you get right to the final stages of either the Europa League or the Europa Conference. So I was talking to the board of somebody from a club that could get into the Europa Conference recently.
Brighton.
And,
is it Brighton?
No. And I was saying, okay, what's in it? And they say, well, look, we've done our sums, and if we break even, we'll do well, because if we're going to be playing in the Europa Conference, we've got to plan for 3, potentially 13, 15 Thursday games, and we can't do it with the size of the squad that we've got. So therefore, we need to spend as far as the transfer market is concerned. So that's something that we saw with Leicester. I mean, the Leicester's squad cost at the 31st of May 2022, the squad cost over £400 million, which for a non-Big Six club is huge. And they spent £67 million that season, and then they didn't qualify for Europe, and that's why we've seen cutbacks. Kasper Schmeichel went. Some other players didn't sign extended contracts because the club didn't manage to match the players' aspirations. And it only takes one season of not qualifying for Europe to say, well, we now don't need the size of that squad anymore. Yeah. So therefore, we're going to cut back in recruitment. And in respect of Everton, I mean, to be fair to Everton, they had to sell Richarlison. They only re-spent a small proportion of that money. They have subsequently sold Anthony Gordon, and some of the players that they have recruited have either been on loan or at relatively low fees. So that's the position that Everton find themselves on. And with respect to Andrew's question, and I suspect the question was written before the charges were levelled at Everton. The club is not immune from FFP because they're now up before the beak.
Yeah, the way our waiting list for questions is going, it could have been written while Dixie Dean was playing for Everton, to be perfectly honest. Yes. Leicester have potentially bigger problems. There's no doubt that they're in trouble at the bottom of the table. And as Gary Lineker gloomingly pointed out on Match of the Day on Saturday night, I think there's 7 or 8 of their big players are out of contract in the summer, and they won't be signing new contracts if they're relegated, will they?
They won't, and also they were giving the impression that half of their minds were already somewhere else, which was disappointing. And I would not besmirch professionals, but I was when I look at that Leicester squad, I think they shouldn't be where they are. Yeah. But that's a separate issue. So they are in a tricky position with regards to the owners. The owners have stopped putting money in. Now, they are still looking to expand their training facilities. They're still, I was about to go say to expand Filbert Street, which shows how old I am, but to expand the new ground as well. But how they're going to fund that is a separate issue.
Although I do have to ask, Kieran, and this is a conversation Palace fans had 2 seasons ago. If a club is in danger of relegation and they do have 7 or 8 of their biggest players, their biggest earners, coming up to be out of contract, is that not actually a better scenario than having those players still in contract and wanting to leave anyway?
Well, you get fees for them.
Okay.
If they're good, they will be picked up elsewhere.
Right.
Yeah, we saw that with Burnley when they were relegated. McNeil went to Everton, and some of the other players went elsewhere. And then Burnley have recruited superbly. What Vincent Kompany has done is absolutely amazing. But you're better off getting fees for them than letting them go on a Bosman.
Right. If you would like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that's very kind of you, then please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show about Dixie Dean or any other player of the current football world, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, thank you so much for your support for the show. Thanks for engaging with us, keeping us on our toes, and even sort of the obscure things. The number of people who contacted me on Saturday afternoon to say that Chester City had changed their own kit because one of their own players was colourblind was quite touching.
Yeah, that was a brilliant story. That was a really applause all round for that. Yeah.
So that's great, and we enjoy reading your questions, even though some of them make reference to guineas and things like this. We will, but no question is ever thrown away. Okay,
that's true.
There's another way of supporting the show, and that's to go onto your app and to give us a review. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with a bit of credibility when we're trying to book guests. And the guest we had from Caledonian Braves was absolutely brilliant,
very good
on Friday.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you say in the review. You could even say you would rather it hosted by Declan Rice, but not that one, and James Corden. And I wouldn't care.
We're talking of guests, Kieran. We have some really interesting guests coming up. We've got the head of Scottish football. We have somebody from the Chelsea Pitch Club. We have a novelist who's written a brilliant book about football. I really do hope, I'm secure in the knowledge James Corden won't be listening to this because he's not in it. But I really hope for many reasons that it is true that the reason Chelsea got Frank Lampard back in was because of his advice. I just love that concept. Sorry. Well, it's good to end with a chuckle, Kieran, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's amazing when we both win, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.